Founder and CEO of Shibumi, which is a strategic program and portfolio management software company. And Jason Miller, our VP of Global Continuous Improvement at Aludyne, which is a vertically integrated business that manufactures automotive parts. And as somebody who likes to turn the key and know that my car will start, I am delighted that somebody is invested in continuous improvement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're going to probably sit up here. Is that all right? So thanks, Jason. Jason was nice enough to join us today, and we're going to basically split the presentation into about 10 minutes on the front end where I'll share some of the experiences that we've had over the last 12 years helping over 200 large-scale transformation customers execute more than 200 transformation programs, and then some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry around those experiences, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Aludyne's experiences of really establishing a continuous transformation discipline. So to kick it off, I'll show a slide that I think we've all experienced before, but it's really driving and seen before, but it's driving a lot of the pace of change and urgency, I think, in the market, right? Obviously, most of us are aware that since 2000, more than 50% of the Fortune 500 has kind of turned over and really fallen out of that position, whether it be through acquisition, bankruptcy, or overall challenges in the business. And I think the most important part of the statistic is that it is accelerating, right? There was, I think, a piece done by McKinsey last year that talked about by 2027 that potentially 75% of the Fortune 500 might have turned over. So what that's doing and what that's driving, obviously, for many organizations is realizing they need to drive transformational change and disrupt themselves. And just quick background for those that aren't familiar with Shibumi. So we've been in this space for the last 12 plus years. We've worked with over 200 transformation programs at some of the largest organizations around the world. We've done a lot of those direct. We've also worked with each of the top 10 global advisory firms on large-scale transformations. Actually, I think just about all of them have at least one multi-billion-dollar transformation program running right now on Shibumi. And it's across a spectrum of use cases, certainly digital transformation, cost takeout, M&A, innovation. And most notably, in the last couple of years, a lot of AI governance, right? How do you really manage the ideation backlog through value realization of AI? Very global company, and we've gotten the opportunity to work with great organizations, like Aludyne along the way. And there's been an interesting transition that we've seen over the last 5+ years, where when we first started getting involved in large-scale transformation programs, they were very temporal, right? There was a 2 or 3 year program often. There was very specific measurable objectives. We're going to drive $1 billion worth of cost out of the business. The chief transformation officer was a temporal role. You'd have a president of a business unit that would parachute in to be the chief transformation officer. They'd vigorously go after those objectives, measurable objectives. They hopefully hit them, declare victory, and go back to quote-unquote business as usual. Well, the reality is, right, I think one term that is probably fading away in the world today is business as usual, right? The pace of change has really reached a point where establishing transformation as a discipline in the organization is probably the most critical thing. And even the chief transformation officer role is not that dissimilar to, I think, what many of us that are my age saw, 30 years ago for the CIO, right? There were times for some of us that are my age or older that know when the CIO wasn't really a role, right? They were just the technology guy that reported into the chief administrative officer or reported into the CFO. And obviously, we've come to a point in an organization where management of data and technology is absolutely as critical as everything else that we do as an organization. So I think the transformation officer, we're starting to see them become a true C-level executive because high-performing organizations are finding ways to be extremely adaptive and innovative in how they operate. So we actually did a study late last year of interviewed 250 plus transformation executives, and there are a few interesting insights that came out of that. 70% of those organizations were going through very large-scale transformational programs. 80% of those transformation offices were actually growing quite significantly. And 75% of them saw a significant compression in planning cycles. And I bring that up, and Jason will speak about it, because that's the thing that I think is happening most aggressively right now, is that the compression of the cycle times to make decisions and course correct and adjust plans are getting shorter and shorter. the years of annual budget cycles or that stay in stone are gone. The 5-year strategic plan is kind of comedy at this point. So it's really getting to that point where how can you be nimble and innovative? And then the really interesting one is that less than 50% of the organizations in the market, feel that they have the data to really adapt to the pace and shifting market conditions and priorities. So that is interesting segue. What are high-performing organizations doing? So Deloitte, who's a strategic partner of ours, did a study in the last year where they talked about and analyzed that 6 organizations that are using data and technology to assess risk and do prioritization are 16 times more successful. Right, they're 12 times more likely to high-performing organizations to use data to help identify the right decision stakeholders, get the right information in front of the right people, and they're 10 times more likely to use change management tools to execute decisions and drive decision making. So, which is a really good segue because Alodine is one of these really high-performing organizations that's using data and technology to drive what they do. So maybe Jason, you could take us through a little bit about who Alodine is and kind of your journey.
So at Alodine, we're one of the largest single integrated resources of high quality aluminum castings in the automotive industry, primarily steering knuckles, lower control arms. Unfortunately, nothing that'll turn your engine on. But we will make sure the wheel doesn't come off when you're going 70 down the highway, which tends to be important. We are relatively vertically integrated, and then we've got manufacturing capabilities across the world. So if you want to switch to the next slide, Bob. Yep. I joined Alodine about 9 months ago. So Alodine's been a company in a bit of flux. 6 complete new management teams in the last 5 years. So you can imagine the upheaval when it comes to data gathering, data acquisition, management strategy, et cetera. So when I walked in the door, it was, okay, what do we have to overcome here? What do we have to take a look at? Alodine kind of came about through a series of M&As, smaller casting companies that weren't able to make it on their own, that kind of got cobbled together into one behemoth. And as a result, you had really differing ways that they analyzed data, different ways that they approached how they were going to look at ideation and value creation. And with a global footprint as well, you had cultural differences and regional differences to tack on top of it. What we really wanted to get Alodine to was something where we were optimizing those decisions centrally, not taking away the control of the regions, but ensuring that we had cohesiveness in the way that we approached decisions in investment, decisions in what projects we're going to go after, and really, as the gentleman from McGraw-Hill mentioned, the decisions of what you weren't going to go after. What was important and what wasn't important. And tying that back into integrated analytics so that we were looking at everything with a common denominator so that when we were evaluating 2 different business cases, it was an apples-to-apples comparison.
No, it's great. And one of the things that Jason and I really share an opinion on is that it's really critical to establish this transformational discipline as a life cycle that an organization can continuously go through and continuously improve. So we talked a lot about over the last even few days, what are those outcomes that Alodine is looking to define that are really driving the direction of some of the change and transformation work that you guys are doing?
So when we took a look at it, obviously we're private equity owned, so P&L is king in that scenario, right? But as you mentioned as well, P&L is not the key thing that you always want to look at. It's important, but we also have to look at employee involvement. If I look at employee turnover in the manufacturing space pre-COVID versus today, world-class pre-COVID was 15% annually. World-class today is 55% hourly employee turnover in the manufacturing space. The norm is north of 100%. So you think about that from a training aspect, from a employee engagement aspect, not only are you churning through people more often than you used to, you're now tapping into resource pools and employment pools of people that have never really worked in that industry before. So you really have to kind of have a major alteration in your mind shift of how you address those people and engage them to get their ideas as well.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, and it's a good segue around the ideation. So we've seen really high-performing organizations obviously have clear and definitive direction in terms of what are those measurable objectives that they're trying to achieve, but then it becomes how do we generate the ideas necessary to go execute on those objectives. And I think you guys are doing some really interesting things around ideation and democratizing some of the ideation in the organization.
Yeah.
Can you share maybe that?
Definitely. Yeah. Manufacturing has a tendency to kind of revert back to the caveman days at times, right? It's engineers that are told to go to the floor and go find something you can save money on or that you can save time on. Or maybe in a progressive manufacturing environment, there's the suggestion box on the wall, right? Where somebody writes something down and it goes in there and God knows where it goes from there. We kind of tried to turn that on its head, knowing especially that the folks that touch those machines and touch those products every day, they're the true experts in what we do, and they're the lifeblood of what we do. So tapping into both that knowledge, but also understanding that the current generation accesses information and deals with information a lot differently than they did in the past. So in every one of our facilities now, there's a QR code all over the place. In the lunchroom, at their machines, they can scan that QR code, take a picture of something they're having a problem with, and instantly post whatever suggestion they have or issue that they need addressed. It goes right into Shibumi, which is our centralized project management system. And then the teams within those plants have a 72-hour turnaround time to evaluate that solution and either A, assign a champion and get moving on the project, or B, if it's not a viable project or we need a little bit more information, they have that same 72-hour window to provide the communication flow back to the original suggester. Because there's nothing worse than when somebody puts in an idea and yeah, things are happening in the background. We're ordering material, we're assigning project teams, and nobody talks to the person who originally put in the suggestion. And as a result, where did their mind go? Well, they didn't care. They didn't listen. What we're going for is the flip side. When they see the action, when they see things take place, now they become disciples. They become evangelizers. In that lunchroom, when somebody else is talking to them and saying, well, is it worth doing this? Oh yeah, they fixed my problem. They become the ones now that are starting to advance it. You know, when we look at, you know, and I'm going to kind of transition to when we talk about defining business cases and ranking and prioritizing, even though we want to make sure the vast majority of our projects are focused on the bottom line, right? Those metrics where we're trying to improve product margins, we're trying to improve our overall quality. We also want to make sure we leave room and leave time and leave resources for projects that improve the employee experience, that remove pain. Maybe I can't value it on a dollar-by-dollar basis, but that's what builds the culture. And once the culture starts to build, it's not a top-down effort. It becomes a pull from the employees on the floor. Hey, I saw what you did over there. Come help me over here. This is my problem. And as a result, you begin to build that. And really, as we can get those projects into Shibumi, into our centralized project management system, it then gives us the ability to have full visibility to what's going on, not this endless parade of nested Excel spreadsheets that you pray to God nobody overwrote a formula or fat-fingered a number into, which I'm sure we've all seen.
So one of the things that I think you've done a really great job of at Aludyne is during that business case process, really understand the business impact and the key assumptions and around, you know, what are the resource requirements, not only the financial, but the human capital resources, what are the interdependencies, so that you can assess the impact of both the timing and investment prioritization, and then to your point, be able to have a mix of those very financially focused initiatives combined with the ones that are going to really drive the right level of employee experience, as you mentioned.
That project pipeline balances right up against the bandwidth of each of those resources. So we can look at a bandwidth map and basically tell, have I overloaded anybody? Have I created a scenario where it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure?
Yeah.
You know, if I've got an engineer that's loaded to 70 hours a week because I put 9 projects on him, I'm not going to be surprised when it fails. But it also gives us the ability, as you mentioned earlier, you know, we do an annual budget cycle, but we do a monthly recalibration because things change so quickly in this industry. I may have to prioritize and deprioritize projects based on customer needs or possible business acquisition.
Yeah.
As a result, I can very quickly say, okay, if I take this out, if I add this, what does it do to my bandwidth map?
Yeah.
Rather than having to send 15 emails and have 32 conference calls, I can immediately understand what my resources will be loaded to.
Right. So some of the kind of scenario planning you're able to do in real time. As I always joke around, once you fund and green light a plan, the only thing you know for sure is that the plan's wrong.
Yes.
It's just a matter of how wrong it is and what's the impact of those changes. So you talked a little bit earlier as well around aggregating the business impact and be able to generate forecasts and updates for your leadership team. What is your, first of all, who are you communicating that to, and what's your reporting cadence?
That's directly to our CEO and our C-suite, and it also goes to our board. It's on a monthly basis. We do a third Tuesday of every month, the monthly operating review, where we go through the ideation pipeline, we go through the business case decision making, and then we do comparative analysis between the regions to ensure that we're getting what we said we were going to get.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting that you're able to do that on a monthly basis. And in your mind, are you able to, or from your experience here, are you able to generate kind of that update automatically? What's the level of effort for you to be able to do that, and the time turnaround?
So the first 2 months I was there, before we fully started to use the system, it took us roughly 3 weeks to generate the once a month update. We do it in an hour and a half now.
Yeah.
So it definitely makes a big difference.
No, it's huge. We had talked about it even earlier today, that was that ability to be able to course correct and to reprioritize and to be pivot as an organization is directly associated with that compression of the time between when you're producing data and when you're able to review that data. Because there's a lot of organizations that we discussed that have great data, but that data is 30 days old. Right? It's like driving down the street, and instead of a windshield, you've got a live feed from 30 seconds ago. Right? Really challenging to drive. Right? But that's a reality when you think about it. I joked with Jason that the first deck we ever put together when we founded Shibumi, we talked about when I was a kid, you get news, you'd walk out to the end of your driveway and you'd get the paper, you'd open it up, check your stock quotes, you'd wait till 6 p.m. to watch the evening news to get updates. And that level and cadence of information, we couldn't imagine going through life getting our information that way today, yet would be so exceptionally better than what most executives have to make decisions on the largest, most strategic things they're doing. So this ability to be really real time in terms of how you're communicating allows you then to course correct in real time, which I think is pretty exciting.
And then connecting a lot of our applications, our payroll systems, our safety tracking systems, our shop floor control systems, our ERPs and our MRPs directly into this gives us live feeds of our KPIs. So instead of being the football coach that reads the paper the next day to see whether or not we won or lost, we can make in-game adjustments on the fly. Hey, wait a minute, this number is trending in the wrong way before it's beyond a lower control limit. I know it seems like relatively basic stuff, but we did that in the past through an armada of people gathering data and manually inputting data. And it just wasn't either A, good use of resources, or B, accurate, because humans make mistakes.
Yeah. So as you're establishing this discipline and applying it to obviously core continuous improvement use cases, driving cost optimization and improvement opportunities, what's next for you in terms of what you're thinking about applying now that you've built some of this muscle around continuous improvement?
There's really 2 areas we're looking at next. One is within human resources. Talent acquisition, employee retention is key for us. Yeah. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution. As we learned throughout the years of COVID, employee turnover and employee retention was going to vary depending where you were at, not just in the world, but in the country.
Yeah.
What's important to people varies depending on their cultural situation. I had factories in Southern California, and what was more important to them was, could we help provide English as a second language training to their family members? That was a draw that could keep people. Versus a plant that I had in Northern Canada, every single child care center closed during COVID and none reopened. So we were able to identify the old-fashioned way, the manual way of going through and polling a lot of people, that providing, opening one on our own grounds and providing the ability for single mothers or for families to be able to have a place to put their kids could get you a tie to that community. Yeah. What we want to take that to the next step to is, as we can start to A, use data to define those things, but B, start to blend AI into that. Even into what we do with customer value approaches. Yeah. Rather than having to set up long sessions with account executives or with salespeople to determine what product is going to work for them depending on the application they want to use, we can build that into an AI system where they can go through and browse through a library of different applications, different AI perspectives. How would this work on this vehicle if I'm hauling this or in this particular type of environment? And really triangulating what they're looking for before they even have to step foot into a meeting.
That's pretty awesome. And by the way, if anybody knows about the differences in cultures across the globe, it's probably Jason. So Jason shared with me of the 206 UN-recognized countries, Jason's now been to 167. So I don't know if anybody here in the room has beat that number, but that's pretty solid perspective on what's happening across the world. So it's a great segue around AI because it's kind of what's the next phase and generation that I think everybody, and obviously a lot of the topic of conversation today. Part of that study I mentioned that we did at the end of last year, we talked to some of the transformation leaders around, how many of those organizations have stood up a AI COE within their organization. Over 60% of them had a truly centralized AI COE. And then the other thing was almost 90% of them said they were going to materially increase their spend in those COEs, which is not surprising, obviously. What's really interesting was, as you shared some of those examples of how you're looking to deploy that technology, is there doesn't seem to be a shortage right now of ideas on how to apply the technology, right? It's still a shortage of capacity to be able to effectively deliver. And then we talked a lot about that ability to really figure out which of those ideas truly deliver value for the organizations and what were the characteristics, right, of those ideas that made them deliver value, to try to do more of those, and obviously probably divest in some of the ideas that maybe either you're not prepared for and or aren't able to deliver real value. So,
well, and even as we started to take a look at, for instance, that customer value creation side, that instantly dovetailed into, well, wait a minute, if we're looking at libraries of images, knowing that we have operators that have to do visual inspection, how can we use AI in determining how we train those inspectors? Because different people see different things different ways. If I can then provide them, similar to what the gentleman from McGraw-Hill talked about, if I'm doing a training session where they can do a 20-piece, 30-piece, 40-piece study, and I can determine what they miss, AI can then generate a detailed learning plan for that person that focuses on the areas that they had trouble seeing. For example, because we make aluminum castings that determine whether or not your wheels fall off or not, every single part gets x-rayed 100%. And an individual has to read and interpret those x-rays. You can't have somebody that has a blind spot because they don't quite see the shadowing of something. The training that you can provide for them can help to eliminate that. But if you give the same training program to the same people over and over again, you run the risk of them getting bored. And then they miss it because they're not engaged anymore. If it's something that's engaging them and it's addressing the areas that they need to correct themselves, then you start to get that engagement.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, I think we're getting close to being up on time, so we'll open it up maybe for any questions that anyone has for the two of us. But really appreciate you taking the time. Any questions for Jason and myself? Sure.
I was the kid in class that always raised his hand first. Sorry. You mentioned, going back a little bit into the conversation, you mentioned that folks on the front line put in ideas right away and you get a 72-hour turnaround time. How did you get that started? Because we have a process, but it's like crickets. Almost all of our ideas are still top down. So I've got a few thoughts, but I'd be curious, how did you guys get that culture embedded where people were speaking up and saying, hey, this could get fixed, this could get fixed?
The easiest way that we found to do it was to just go for the quickest win we could get. And typically what we had tried to do, and you might call it stacking the deck, but it did work, was in the pilot facility that we did, we found a couple of the, let's just call them the loudest critics in the room, the ones that always had something negative to say. And we challenged them. You seem like you're not happy. You've always got something that isn't working. Tell me what you would do different. Help us help you. And once we're able to get a couple of the things that really stuck in their craw taken care of, they became the loudest voices telling everybody else that, hey, there's actually something to this. I'm a big proponent of, I like to make my biggest critic my biggest defender, if I can do it.
Yeah, and you share that ability to very quickly assess which of these things could deliver some incremental value and the level of effort was reasonable, and they do a bit of a bubble chart, kind of 2 by 2 on that gives them the ability to quickly kind of pluck off some things that maybe wouldn't hit the top of the list in terms of strategic impact, but allow you to build that kind of trust and kind of buy-in from the organization that you're listening. I think that was interesting. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate the time. That's great.